Yeah. It's a beautiful song. So, the unveiling, the mask that we wear. So, a mask is generally like this object, right, that covers your face, and it's been used throughout history for a multitude of different reasons. One reason might be protection. So those of us who work in factories might want to use a mask, right? A mask can also be used as a disguise. So if any of us wanted to rob a bank, we would want to use a mask, ideally. Masks are also used in entertainment. So they're used in the theater, right? You put on a mask and you put on a show, or you might put on a mask for entertainment and go to like a party, a masquerade ball. And so some of us have enjoyed that. And the other very common purpose for masks is actually religious or spiritual rituals. And so African tribes traditionally, in their religious rituals, will often have a person who's conducting the ritual come in and put on a mask. And the idea is that in putting on the mask, that person is relinquishing his or her human side and adopting, channeling, being open to the spirit that is represented by the mask that they put on. So spiritually, masks are used. Of course, in our modern day, there are two key holidays that I can think of when I think of mask wearing. And of course, there's Halloween. And Halloween comes from the Celtic tradition, which is the Celtic Day of the Dead, where it is said that in that time in the fall, in that particular day, the veil between worlds becomes thinner. And so these evil spirits can kind of come through to our side. So the original idea behind Halloween is that we're going to put on these scary masks and we're going to scare them away, or at least convince them that we're one of them so they won't torment us. So Halloween was originally about wearing scary masks to scare away the evil spirits. But then in contrast, we have Mardi Gras. And Mardi Gras is based on these beautiful masks like this one that you see, that are ornate. And the tradition behind those, what we call masquerade masks, stems from the Renaissance period, and in Italy in particular. Rather than hiding from evil spirits, people were hiding from each other. And particularly, it was the elite who wanted to be able to do things that were socially unacceptable around each other. So by hiding under the mask, these people could do things in society that they normally couldn't do based on their class. So the wearing of masks can be very fun. So fun that some people like to do it on a regular basis. My husband is one of them. He's the kind of person who likes to costume up and stuff. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking of doing a slideshow, and I thought, I'm going to go on Google, and I'm going to search for all these images. So instead, I went to my basement and pulled out this one of Victor at the Renaissance Festival. He used to do the Ren Fest for years. So there's Victor, but of course the most fun is when you get to wear masks with little kids, right? And so the other picture that I pulled out of our basement is from our wedding, and we can transfer it to the next slide. And these are my little nieces and nephews at our wedding rehearsal dinner, because it makes perfect sense for Vietnamese kids to dress up like cowboys and girls. So Victor is from a rodeo family, so we wanted to honor him in this way. And so masks, right? We'll just leave that slide up. So masks can be really fun to wear. But we have the masks that we standardly know. When we put on masks like that, we know that we are consciously putting on a mask. We have no illusion, at least most of us have no illusion that we're fooling anyone with this mask, right? We're not deluding anyone that we are somehow this role that we're playing, right? And nor are we deluded, for the most part, that we are this role that we're playing when we put on this mask. But then there are these other masks that we wear, like on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes we put on these masks consciously, But our purpose in doing it is to hopefully delude other people into thinking that we are that which we convey ourselves to be, right? And we might do this, maybe not with this, very obvious outside mask, but we might do this through things like our clothing, like whether we want to appear professional or sporty or artistic, right? We want to present a certain image. And we also do this by our bodily gestures and mannerisms. Like my youngest sister, who's like 10 years younger than me, is a bit of a hipster. So her attitude is generally like, there's nothing that excites her too much, it just kind of has that, like, yeah, that's cool, but yeah. So she has this attitude. And then I was told by a dear friend of mine that I have a walk that's called the doing it on your own walk. Right, like I walk like I'm self-reliant and confident. So when I do it, especially when I'm going to work or something, so I have it doing it on her own walk. And so hopefully you're all convinced that I'm ultra confident, right? So that's the idea behind the walking. Some of us, many of us actually, especially in Unity, have this image of being a happy person, positive person. So the moment we're out the door, it doesn't matter what just happened behind the doors, but the moment we're out, we come to church, hi. We want people to feel that, like, oh yeah, that's a positive and happy person. And so that's the image that we put on, like right as soon as we walk out the door. So there's that. There's first the mask that we put on that, there's no question that this is a mask. The second is a mask that we consciously put on that we're hoping we've convinced some people, right, is actually what we are. And then the third kind of mask that we put on is a mask that Carl Jung talks about, which is a mask that we don't even realize we are wearing. We are not even conscious that we put on this mask, not even when we walk out the door, but that we're wearing this mask even with our children and our loved ones. And Carl Jung calls this mask our persona. So, our persona is this image. And so the thing about the persona is that we develop it initially, according to Jung, because as little babies, as little kids, we're very reliant on our primary caregivers, right? For love, for our needs to be met, our needs for food, shelter, our needs for connection, and even our need for autonomy. And so what happens is we learn very early on what behaviors and attitudes, ways of being help to get those needs met or not, right? Some of us learn that we best get those needs met when we're super cute, and charming with our parents, then we get all the love and attention we want. And others of us learn that actually that doesn't work at all. And we only get attention when we're sickly, when we're crying. And so we learn to have this affect of sickliness or sadness because somehow we've learned that we actually get more love or get more attention from that. And this is pretty effective when we're kids, right? And so the issue isn't that we do this, but the issue is that we do this for so long. We put out the traits that we think are desirable, and then we squash anything else that arises for us. We put it down. And we do it for so long that over time, we actually forgot that those other traits were our own. We do it for so long that that which we presented to our loved ones, much less to the world, we come to actually believe that we are. And so we sit there going, yeah, I don't know why I do it. I'm just a giving person. That's who I am. I'm just a giving person, right? Or yeah, I'm a cheerful person, right? Or I'm an intellectual, Or I'm a skeptic. I'm proud of it. You hear those people, I'm a skeptic. So we start to actually think that this is what we are. So Carl Jung teaches us that when this happens over time, that entire collection of energies and impulses that we have that we've repressed, that's what's called our shadow. That's what Victor was talking about when he refers to the shadow side of life. So our shadow, and I want to share in that a quote. Bring this back in. My video guys are like, I'm going to be running around. So excuse me, I want to share. Robert, in his book, Birthing a Greater Reality, talks about this shadow. I wanted to share. He says, we treat our shadow like a leper colony. We drive the parts of ourselves that we deem ugly and sickly into exile so that we do not have to look at them. And again, in the early years, this was good for us, right? Because we needed it to survive, to get our basic needs met. And it's important to know that it doesn't make us like bad people for having created these images. You know, when normally we judge people for being like, oh, you're superficial, or that's just an image of yourself. The idea is that each and every one of us actually do it in some form or another. So the problem isn't that we do it. The problem is whether we outgrow it or not. The problem is ultimately the point at which being connected or identified with that outer layer, but not with our inner self, actually stifles our spiritual and our personal development, right? So there are profound costs to doing this, to creating this egoic structure. The first one is that we carry inner conflict, right? And this can show up in so many ways. It can manifest as anxiety, right? Okay, going back a step. Our persona is that which we are consciously identified with. Our shadow we're actually identified with too, but just unconsciously. So we're still identified with this whole part of ourself, but half of it is unconscious. So there's inner conflict. Over the years, it can show up as depression and anxiety, and over time, for many of us, physical illness, right? Ailments in our bodies. So also, one of the issues is that we may try to alleviate the pain of this sense of separation and disconnectedness from our very being through compulsive behavior. We want to numb ourselves out. You know, we want to just keep going. Some of us keep busy because we know that if we stopped, there would be pain there. There'd be this nagging sense of emptiness if we just stopped what we were doing. And so busyness is actually an addiction of many of us in this modern day. And not only busyness, but compulsive eating, binge watching television, much less some of the other addictions that, where we end up in 12-step programs, drug addiction, sex addiction, alcoholism, codependency, all these addictions, all these ways in which we try to not feel that nagging sense of incompleteness and emptiness. So, another thing is that when we are exclusively, it's not about being identified with the persona, it's about being exclusively identified with this persona, is that we're actually not living from a truly authentic place. How could we? We're not connected to our own selves. So we can't express what we in Unity talk about all the time as the main goal of why we're here, which is to express our essential nature, our true self, our divine self, our Christ nature. That is impossible until we do some integration work with our shadow. So, what's also interesting about this, and some of you who are therapists may already know this part of ourselves that's bad. Like, some of us might feel like, you know, I'm stuck. I've been working on this stuff, doing these positive affirmations, and I'm stuck. And what we don't realize is that in our shadow actually lies our power. What we don't realize is that when we repress our anger, we also repress our vitality. And we don't realize all the time that we repress our sexuality, our healthy expression of sexuality. We also repress our passion, our creativity. And when we repress like our sensitivity and our vulnerability, and we start to sort of build that wall around our hearts, then, we wonder why we can't keep intimate relationships, right? Or whether we struggle, even in the relationship we have, to be more vulnerable and exposed. So there are costs to this. But within each of these elements that we deem bad is also a strength and a power were we to integrate it. So, even if we're unconscious to our own shadow, the interesting thing about the shadow is it actually can't be kept down, right? So it shows up, it leaks, and we might find that, for instance, we might be repressing our anger, but then one day, we just blow up, right? And we didn't see it coming, and nobody saw it coming. That's unconscious. We didn't see it coming. We had repressed it in our unconscious. So it also shows up, though, in something called projection. Some of you guys might have heard of this term, projection. And there's this beautiful quote from Carl Jung about this. Projections change the world into the replica of one's unknown face. Projection changes all of you into the replica of what I don't know yet about myself and haven't owned yet about myself. Projections change the world into the replica of one's unknown face. So that means that public figures, like movie stars, but also ministers, are often the targets for projection, right? But also, a lot of times, our romantic partners become the targets of our projection, such that we stop seeing them for who they are. We see a pattern in our minds, and we project it out onto them. And you see it, it's easier to see it from the outside, how, there's a jealous partner, and that partner just sees this old relationship, this person that always left them or always abused them, and you're it, even if you're not it. You're being projected onto in that case. So, what's interesting about projection is, one interesting thing about the shadow is we think of it as this unacceptable part of ourselves. But the shadow can actually itself contain what's called a golden shadow, which means that within the shadow might be positive elements that we were just told were unacceptable. For instance, here in Unity, we're like, shine your light, shine it brightly. Most of us weren't taught that as kids. We're taught instead something like, who are you to be bigger than your britches, Who are you to think that you could go to college? Who are you to do that? Well, look at us, look at our suffering, right? And so some of the positive aspects we've suppressed because we weren't given permission to express those. And so we project outside our demons and our angels. And the key to that is you come to see that it's about them and it's not about me. That's kind of how we know we're projecting. It's all about them. This has nothing to do with me, right? I've never said that. So now that we know this, what do we do about it? So the path of personal and spiritual growth invites us to what? Embrace our shadow. Embrace those parts of ourselves that we deemed completely unacceptable. But of course, the first thing is awareness, recognizing them. And we can, when we see ourselves pointing fingers continually. And again, you can see this easier in like your partner or your friends than yourself, which is like they have repeat issues. Suddenly, they're always upset when someone's deceptive, right? Not authentic. Or they're always upset when someone's belittling. So most of us have a story that is common to us that we repeat. That story is a clue to our shadow. And when we start to have awareness of that, we start to heal the shadow because the light of awareness automatically brings darkness out of darkness, right? And so the other thing is that once we have awareness, the really, really vital thing and I talk about love all the time, and it sounds cliche, but the really vital thing is then to deeply love, deeply embrace that which comes forth from you, that which is within you, no matter what. And I say this, and I'll say it repeatedly, because when this arises, it feels like the worst thing in the world. When it arises, it is the very thing we detested and abhorred about anybody in the world. But our call is actually to love and embrace it. Radical acceptance. That which we judge the harshest must be that which we have learned to love and embrace for us to move forward into awakening, into our wholeness, into an expression of our divine potential. So I want to give just a brief example in my own life of how I dealt and continue to deal with the shadow issue. I think we deal with them in layers. One of the themes of what I personally judge, two things. Lazy people. They're so lazy, right? And oh my God, they're so incompetent. Oh, like this has been like my life story, lazy and incompetent. And I look back in my family and I go, wow, there's a reason all 5 kids got straight A's. There's a reason. The parents teaching that somehow if you did not prevail in that, if you did not succeed in that, you would not be loved, was not the explicit, but the underlying message. You are not lovable if you do not perform. So get off your bottom and do it. That was the message I got, and that was the message I overlaid on everybody around me. But I wasn't it, because I worked really hard. Right? I'm always running around, busy, I'm hardworking, right? The persona is the opposite of that which I repress and didn't own. So the work was to start to go, oh my God, what does it feel like when I fail? Can I feel that? It feels like death. It's a survival thing. It feels like death. But if I can own that, feel it, then I start to have empathy and compassion for it. Then I start to heal it. And then it's no longer in the darkness. Then it's manageable. Because the light of awareness is on it, right? And a more general shadow that probably most of us have, because society teaches us to repress anger, is that, anger. And so a lot of us repress anger, at least in certain situations. And the problem with this is that when it comes out, again, it comes out in unhealthy ways. But when we own it, we have mastery over it. When we own it, it becomes manageable. So, anger. So, normally, when y'all think of freedom, right, at least for me, I think of, I can do what I want when I want. That's freedom, right? But the thing is, what's tricky about this when we deal with persona is that if I'm identified with this shell, right, then what this wants is not actually what I truly want. So I'm not free. I'm just living a habituated life. I'm just choosing what this thing thinks, oh, I'm choosing to work 14 hours a day. This is an important choice. I'm free to choose this. It feels like freedom over here, right? But if I back up, I recognize something different. And actually, in the words of the poet and the musician Jim Morrison, the most important kind of freedom is to be what you really are. You trade in your reality for a role. You trade in your sense for an act. You give up your ability to feel, and in exchange, you put on a mask. There can't be any large-scale revolution until there is a personal revolution on an individual level, he says. It's got to happen inside first. So, this deep self that I've been talking about, this deep self-embrace and love is not only the basis for like a free and authentic life, but it's also the basis, go figure, for real relationships, right? As Robert writes in his book, to truly love another, we must be willing to love all aspects of ourself, especially those that have been hidden from our view. We have to embrace our shadow. And as Victor sang in his song, the shadow side of you will take wisdom from your wounds. There really is a bright side to the dark. Everything I'm not has made me everything I am. The best way to see the dark is through the light. So when we are willing to embrace our dark side, the things that we think we are not, we come into a fuller knowing of what we truly are. We become more balanced and able to truly choose with freedom, so that the person that is the constant giver still gives a lot, but is also deeply connected to not just what everybody needs outside of me, but to something inside of me that now maybe has an artistic bent. And maybe that giver is now starting to become and express as an artist too, as a poet, as a musician, right? So maybe the compulsively critical perfectionist is still really good at fixing things. That doesn't stop. But also learns to lighten up and be playful. So maybe the perpetual clown is still very funny, but actually is more able to let down that guard, those jokes that they toss out, right, to mask like this softer self inside, and thus able to connect in a real way more. I just want to conclude by saying that owning our darkest parts can be actually horrifyingly painful and scary. And Jung spoke to this when he said, hey, you guys, there's no coming to consciousness without pain, and people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul, he said. We do things that hurt ourselves in order to avoid facing our own soul, but yet, he says again, to live a truly enlightened life, not only must we express light and love as we do here in Unity, but we also must locate the parts of ourselves that are hidden like in the cave of our own consciousness. And we must go down there and bring those things to light. And I'll conclude with a quote by Jung, which is this: one does not become enlightened simply by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. One does not become enlightened simply by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And with that, I'm going to invite Victor to take us into a time of meditation.
And everything I'm not is maybe everything I am. The best way to see the dark is through the light. Shadow side.
So I invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so, and take a deep breath, and turn your attention within. You are the light of awareness that you bring to every part of yourself. And right now, I invite you to bring that light to the parts of yourself that have yet to be seen, acknowledged, and embraced. Perhaps you have inklings of what this part is already. Perhaps you need to simply go down with that flashlight and enter into the dark and come to meet yourself your whole self more fully. I invite you to do this. As you take a deep breath now, slowly let it out. Relax any fear. And take another deep breath. Slowly let it out. And yet go deeper, as if you're walking down into a cave, ready to meet your magnificent self, here now in the silence. And as you bring your attention gently back into the space of this room, as you climb back out of that cave, I invite you to do so knowing that you are surrounded by unconditional love. And I invite you to radiate that same love out to all who are here, embracing each and every one of our shadows together in the space of radical acceptance. And I'll invite Lynn to come up, and as you slowly open your eyes and find your bodies back into the space, I'll invite her to move us into a time of yoga where we can embody this grace-filled acceptance.